All right, here we go. It is the System Failure Podcast, number 42. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Brian. How are you this week?
I'm doing all right. Did you finish moving, Nate?
Yes, I finished moving. I had to. We're only going to be in our current apartment for like 2 months, and so when Tracy and I were putting in our little applications in their Rent Cafe online portal. They were like, all right, well, you each need to pay a $50 application fee. And we were like, oh, is there any way you could, there's two of us, we're only there for 2 months. Is there any way you could, make those application fees a little more reasonable? And they said, oh, no, it's $50 per person. So we looked up the Maine state laws, and it turns out that the application fees they're wanting to charge us are a direct violation of the Maine state law. Our governor signed it into law last August, end of 2023. And so we were like, oh, they're charging illegal fees, but we needed the unit for this little 2-month interim. So we didn't want to blow up our relationship with the place. So we did the application, moved in, and now yesterday I went to confront them with their fees. And I just feel like it tells the story of their economy, of the economy in 2024. It's like all of these junk fees. There's even a letter from the White House in the. About how junk fees are a big problem for the economy in 2024. And this is just the thing. It's like rent seeking is what it is. And we'll come back to rent seeking at the end of the podcast. It's like they have all of these, there's just so many people who want to get a free dollar without really providing any good or service in return for it. And the application fees are the latest example of that. So I had a good time going in there yesterday and confronting the business manager who seemed a little, he seemed put off. He's like, well, for this to be true, our corporation would have to be charging fees illegally across several properties. And I'm like, yes, your corporation is in violation of Maine state law across several properties. They have this whole thing set up where they're getting 50 application fees. A lot of times landlords just they just show units just to get an application fee. It's a way to farm money on a vacant unit. It can be a real moneymaker if you get a couple showings a day if units are in high demand. But it sure felt good to strike back at the man. They're going to have to give us a refund. The man said he would run it up the flagpole to their legal team and get back to me. But it's like you were in. I brought in a actual copy of the statute and highlighted the relevant parts, and he's just in total violation of the law. And he really seemed to be put off by the fact that I was bringing this to their attention. They have no idea.
Well, one thing about the state of Maine is we actually have a pretty clear law that prohibits credit card fees on your transactions. So, if you Google it up, it's pretty easy to find. And so that's also one you should argue.
They have a law against charging fees on your credit card?
Well, they're not allowed to charge you a markup on your credit card. If you pay by credit card, they're not allowed to charge you an extra fee is what this Maine statute explicitly states.
I did not know about that one.
Yeah, so, Chapter 8-509, but, surcharge prohibited. A seller in a sales transaction may not impose a surcharge on a card holder who elects to use a credit card or debit card in lieu of payment by cash, check, or similar means. So it's extremely straightforward.
So downstairs at the convenience store, that's exactly what they do, but they just word it so that you get a discount for paying cash versus a upcharge for the credit card, thereby skirting this thing.
See, I think you could go down there and make a huge stink about it because, in what sense is that? That is just a tax for paying by credit card.
Well, but the way that you just read the law doesn't really leave room for that interpretation. It should, I agree. So it's very clever of them. And I think I remember that they first had an upcharge for credit cards, and they changed it. And I wondered why, but that makes sense. They for the first little while, it was extra 3% for your credit card, and now it's...
Well, there's a second sentence.
Oh, all right, let's hear it then.
For purposes of this section, surcharge means any means of increasing the regular price to a cardholder that is not imposed on a customer paying by cash, check, or similar means.
All right, well, you probably could raise a stink down there and be like, I'm going to need the cash price. Here's my credit card.
Maybe we could go down there some microphones and do a little system failure experiment and bring the hammer down on the poor person working the register. Maybe
we should. That could be some compelling pod. Yeah. Maybe we should do it. Like, hey, listen, the poor beleaguered clerk down there isn't going to have the first clue what we're talking about, or any control to change the prices because the computer is what brings it up. So I don't know. We'll think about it. If we can find a way to make it so it would be compelling, let's do it. But yeah, I think you're just going to get a lot of question marks and confusion, and then they'll have to bring it up to the manager whenever the manager comes in, on his day off or whatever. But we need those kind of ideas are just the thing we need to spice up the pod a little bit.
Well, to some extent, I feel bad because the credit card fees, if you're like trying to run a business and credit card fees, they're taking away a chunk of your business. Although you certainly make more money because people want to pay by credit card because it's convenient. Now, your application fee to rent is, talk about taxation without representation. It's July 3rd right here, the day before July 4th. And yeah, I just don't, you're paying for this opportunity to apply for their, to go into debt peonage to pay for a rental home and, further yourself from a goal of ever owning a home and any financial freedom.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. What's really interesting is that it can be a whole year can elapse, and these rental no one will know about. There's no one to advocate for regular Joes. It's just all of the regulatory agencies are fully captured by the industries they're supposed to be regulating, and so there's just no. The law can just go for a year, and the man inside of the leasing office, the property manager, will never have heard of it. There's just no mechanism of enforcement. God forbid you should go 7 miles an hour over the speed limit, though. There's definitely a mechanism to lighten everyone's wallet with speeding tickets, but no mechanism to protect the consumer from junk fees from these corporations. Interesting where our priorities are, as always. I always like Adam Carolla's dirge about this. It's like we have all these insane rules. He always brings it up like it's not like any aliens came down from Earth, came down to Earth from the stars and commanded us all at laser point that we have to follow these rules. We've made them up for ourselves, and it's interesting that we have so many obnoxious rules that just fleece us for cash, and it's amazing that we don't have rules or the rules aren't enforced where they would actually provide some societal good. So our societal priorities are jacked up, to say the least. Well, what else is going on this week, Brian? I got another piece of feedback just before the pod. It didn't come from any emails of our listeners. It came from you, Brian, and your suggestion was I should not touch the microphone casing during the pod. It makes this noise. But so far, tiny belches and then tiny noises in the microphone is the only. We're up here spinning grand philosophies that span history and encapsulate the grandeur of the human trajectory. And so far, slight burping and slight touching of the microphone case, the only feedback I've gotten. So whatever, we'll try. Obviously, I guess it's the case that if you hold the microphone or have any kind of contact with the microphone at all, that's going to pick up the noise. So hilariously, these are the two pieces of feedback I've gotten so far, which is not really what I expected, but here we are. And let's see, the other big news that's happened since we last recorded was Mr. Julian Assange got let out of Belmarsh Prison over in the UK and he is headed back to Australia for repatriatization, which is awesome news. I really felt bad for that dude. It's interesting when the person who fingers the baddies for the crimes is the one who goes to jail and not the baddies themselves. Or interesting, tragic. But I can't imagine that the Biden administration care. I don't feel I heard that the Donald was on Tim Pool's podcast 2 weeks ago and said he had some major announcement upcoming. So what I think is that he was going to announce his intention to pardon Julian Assange, and that the Biden crew wanted to just remove that arrow from his quiver before he could launch it. But I can't think of any other reason why they would choose now, all these years after the fact, and to go ahead and release Assange. It has to do with the 2024 election, right? My suspicions are raised.
Well, yeah, no doubt it's political calculation. Yeah. This guy's been rotting in prison for 13 years, and this was back I guess it was Hillary v. Trump in 2016. Is that when the WikiLeaks happened?
Well, WikiLeaks happened even before that, but a bunch of WikiLeaks happened in the lead up to 2016.
Because there was other stuff about the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah, there was Iraq war. Roger uses this in his concerts. Iraq war footage of just drone footage of U.S. intentionally lighting up innocent people and laughing about it.
Well, there was something that embarrassed one of the commanders in the army or some. Was that WikiLeaks?
That's General Petraeus in Afghanistan, and it was Michael Hastings. Hastings went over there to Afghanistan in 2012. And in 2012, a huge volcano erupted in Iceland. You may recall that. incident, and it grounded flights worldwide. So this guy, Michael Hastings, who had been over there to observe the troop surge under President Obama in 2012 in the lead up to the 2012 election, trying to make Afghanistan somehow come out in our favor. And Hastings got stuck in Afghanistan because there was no flights coming back stateside because of the aforementioned volcano in Iceland. So Hastings was just hanging out with the military dudes, and they were chit-chatting, and they kind of came to think of Hastings as a friend, and so they were talking about General McChrystal and all the bad things General McChrystal, who at that time was the officer in command of the armed forces in Afghanistan, or the U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and he had all these negative, disrespectful things to say about President Obama, and the lads were shooting pool and boozing, in Kabul, and waiting for the dust cloud to settle so Hastings could get back stateside, and they kind of became friends and let all this slip. And he came back, Hastings did, and reported on all that stuff that they had said. And as a result of that, General McChrystal had to resign.
And then his car mysteriously drove into a tree.
Yeah. He was driving down Laurel Canyon out in Los Angeles, first he was telling his close personal contacts that he was really worried for his life, and he had uncovered some huge story. And the next thing you know, Hastings' car just started accelerating, and out of a tunnel in Laurel Canyon out there in northern Los Angeles. And I guess Laurel Canyon goes from LA proper through the hills to North Hollywood to the valley, and the car just started accelerating until finally it crashed, and Hastings was killed in the resulting carnage and twisted metal and fireball. And it's just really suspicious. Now, let's see. If you go on the internet, I haven't done this in a while, and look it up, you'll find that there's that all of our cars can be hacked into and controlled remotely, and any reasonably modern car. And so it's completely within the realm of possibility that this was some kind of an intelligence services hit, or at least that's the conspiracy. So that's what you're thinking of with reference to Afghanistan. It's a little bit different than Julian Assange, but it is interesting to note that what happens to journalists who defy the empire, who defy the regime, it's often a grisly fate for these poor souls.
Well, it seems like that what Assange reported was kind of a much bigger deal. Or is there supposed to be another story besides General McChrystal that Hastings was,
Yeah, that's so I don't know what that would be, because whatever it was died with him. Right. We'll just never know. It's another one of those weird things like the Las Vegas shooting. I think that was 2012 also, and there was all of this. Was that 2012? I think it might have been 2014. The Las Vegas shooting. All these weird things happened. The main story that this guy Stephen Paddock had, he had all these weapons and he would have had to been changing them at a completely unrealistic pace in order to do what they accused him of doing. Now, he was a professional gambler, but also an FBI asset, Stephen Paddock was. And then when his brother tried to blow the whistle on the whole thing, they found child porn right after that on his brother's computer. And Paddock's house burnt down. The FBI went there and removed a bunch of stuff, and then it burnt down in mysterious circumstances. So it really, the version of events that we get reading our corporate newspapers is just not even doesn't even really make contact with what's really going on.
Yeah, well, you could believe that JFK was taken down by a lone gunman, or that 9/11 was just 11 Saudi hijackers and that's it. Or there's just obviously a real story to these things. And yeah, the Las Vegas shooting was crazy. Yeah, there was one security guard who did one interview on Ellen for some reason.
Yeah, I remember that guy. Yeah, and then he vanished. There's also MBS, who was then, I think, the heir apparent to the Saudi crown, Mohammed bin Salman, who either was the heir apparent or had just become the king of Saudi Arabia, and that's the role he's in today. And this is the guy that ordered the torture and murder of, what was the name of the guy? Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul. They tortured him to death. Remember that?
Yeah.
In Turkey. Yeah. It is just wild. Another journalist whacked. Yeah, so it's really good that Julian Assange made it out of this with his life. That does not often happen for enemies of the regime.
Yeah, well, I want Julian Assange to come out and say something. Has he done that yet? Give some kind of long form interview and go on Joe Rogan maybe?
Not that I'm aware of. I suspect he will not want to do that. He's got a wife now, and I think a couple of kids. He begot those kids in the U.S. Embassy in London or the one in Ecuador. I can't remember which one when he was holed up in the embassy. But he's begat some kids now, so I feel like he probably wants to retire from journalism and not risk another decade and a half in Belmarsh Prison for defying the regime.
It would be a huge FU to the man. And they're going to have to come up with some other, like, trumped up rape accusation or something, or whatever they were trying to do there. Yeah.
Man, it's so bad. But I'm just really glad that Julian, who has done this, like, heroic thing, is, like, at least not going to die in prison. That's the way it looks. So I'm very happy.
Well, you know, Sam Harris says that Julian Assange was leaking important state secrets that threatened to compromise the security of the U.S. military.
Poor Sam Harris. It really is like what we're watching here, and we'll get into this with respect to the presidential debate in a second or two, but like what we're watching here is the fragmentation of the media. You've got the media who just report lies, but they do what power wants them to do. And then one by one, the journalists are defecting to the podcast sphere where they don't have to take those corporate dollars. Like Crystal and Saga are a good example. Tucker is another one. Candace Owens another one. It's like there's like a central narrative, but it's so obviously a lie. The state propaganda is so obviously a lie that no one trusts New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, NPR. No one trusts people are being like Trump pilled because they just keep on getting lied to at the hands of the media. I mean, it goes back to the weapons of mass destruction in 2000. Well, it goes back to like the Red Scare of the 30s and 50s, the two Red Scares, and then the Vietnam War era where we got lied into an insane conflict to contain communism in Southeast Asia. The Gulf of Tonkin comes readily to mind as the fraud that got us into that war, and uncritical journalists didn't manage to. All they did was parrot the media of the regime, but there were no podcasts then to give people an alternative perspective. So even though everything was a lie, the media had a monopoly on the representation of the truth.
Yeah. Well, to get into the debate a bit there, or you have some point you're about to make?
I'll just point out that there's the weapons of mass destruction into the 2000s where the media just totally failed and are just guilty of being stenographers for power. And then there's the Jeffrey Epstein business where all the mainstream newspapers are like wildly uncurious about the scandal of the century, with Jeffrey Epstein. The Nord Stream pipeline, which exploded in 2022, and Seymour Hersh, the famed veteran Washington journalist, said that the U.S. blew it up, but none of the mainstream media wants to talk about it. It's a huge leak of greenhouse gases, one of the biggest in history. But it's just like the Las Vegas thing, we'll just never talk about it again, or the death of Michael Hastings, or just the newspapers are just uncurious about things like the Epstein scandal and like the Nord Stream pipeline. And you can just see why people have completely lost their trust in the mainstream media. It's like the things they leave out are the most potent.
Well, yeah, it's how they kind of try to weave a different kind of narrative.
Yeah.
Well.
And so that leads us to the debate that you just brought up. I only watched the clips of it, but I feel like I've seen most of the debate in clips by now. What about you, Brian? What was your consumption of the presidential debate?
Well, I got through like the first 18 minutes, and then I was like, well, I'm done. It seems like Biden managed to put together like a somewhat cogent response to the first question, and then it immediately just like fell apart into senility. But like Donald Trump, though, he's like, everybody loved Roe versus Wade, and are having it removed. He's trying to say this is like a popular opinion, and I guess that's like a lie, or I don't know. I guess Donald Trump probably told some lie. I didn't listen to the whole thing.
Of course, Donald told whoppers. That's all he does.
Well, but the thing is, though, is there's this even bigger whopper that like Joe Biden's supposed to be like some kind of like actual candidate, and like that is just the lying that any lying Donald Trump did is just nothing compared to that. I mean, they rolled out like the crypt keeper there or some kind of corpse, and it's just. Well, anyone with two brain cells was saying that there's Joe Biden is not fit to be president, and I don't know. They had to try to squelch that narrative, and it's just so painfully apparent. And now they're scrambling to figure out what they're going to do.
It's been so funny to watch. Been watching the breaking points with the aforementioned Crystal and Sagar with Tracy, my lovely fiance, this week. And it's been great. We just cannot stop laughing at the hilarity of the. It's like you feel bad for. Joe Biden with his student loan, making private student loans non-dischargeable in bankruptcy court, personally ruined my life. So my sympathies are very. But even I just sometimes feel bad for the poor guy because you're right. They wheeled him out there on like Hannibal Lecter on a dolly. and he was just not even close to with it. But the idea that the Donald tells whoppers is perfectly acceptable within the echo chambers that is the mainstream media. But the idea that Biden is ridiculously old for this job and is lost in a haze of dementia is not acceptable within that It was really interesting to watch that obvious truth pierce the membrane into the mainstream narrative, into the mainstream media, even if just for a couple of days. It seems like they're walking it back now. And everyone's trying to rally around the president. And of course, everyone around Biden their political fates are his political fate. They're all his little minions. If they replace the nominee, if they replace the presumptive nominee with someone else, then all those people, get replaced also. So they have every incentive to not let Joe Biden off the hook here, not let him go away, so that they can keep their careers going. So it leads to this insane situation where the newspapers were wall to wall, like, Biden, you got to drop out. You're going to end up losing to the Donald here. And now they're all like, oh yeah, if you don't like Biden, it's because you're an ageist, which is hilarious. That's what I've been seeing in the news this week. Headlines like, if you think Biden is too old, Biden has all these great things. His biggest problem is your ageism. That was one that I saw. That's a good one. That's a good headline there.
Well, I think people need to really focus their anger on Joe Biden, right? I think maybe you've got the depression or anxiety, so you hate yourself, or maybe you spent too much time on the internet, so maybe you think trans people are the problem, or maybe you think black people are the problem, or maybe you think white people are the problem. But I can promise you that the problem is that this guy is up there trying to suck the life force out of everyone to keep himself alive, and the parasitism is just unreal, and it's just unfathomably unreasonable that our corporate overlords would try to cram this guy down our throats. And I think you got to be upset is what it is.
I bet a lot of people have been Trump-pilled by being lied blatantly to their faces by the media. Every time they do it, right? Every time they give us every time they just relay the claims about weapons of mass destruction uncritically, people turn it off. The big one for me, I remember in 2016 was I was on my way to work on the morning after the 2016 election, and the NPR was banging on about Donald Trump being an agent of Moscow, which if Putin had put a sleeper agent in the White House, it'd be the biggest story in the history of this country. And then once it turned out to not be true, it just kind of went away, and it was just but NPR was beating this drum with a full court press, and for a couple of days, they had me worried. At first, I was excited that the Donald won because his unfitness for office was the biggest boon, right? The fact that he tells whoppers and is uncouth and has no sense of decorum and is good with crowds and has, the things he's good at and the things he's bad at combined to make the perfect package that's so unfit for office that it's exactly if you're like me, where you're just living out, you're just stuck in student loan hell and there is no escape. You have to wait for the recognition that something's been wrong before you have any hope. Someone's going to have to throw you a rope. Or for me, I was in such student loan debt that someone was going to have to throw me a rope, but there wasn't ever going to be any escape. I still am. I still haven't escaped. I never will. For people like that, for whom there is no redemption possible under the current rules, who cares? If there's no redemption possible for you, then why would you care if someone unfit is in the White House? For me, emotionally, it was more satisfying to let everything just become unfunctional because I had absolutely no skin in the American game whatsoever. And so I just remember, even with all of that, I just remember pausing and being like, "What? Maybe the Donald really is from Moscow." If NPR wouldn't be saying if it was a lie, and it was a complete lie. It was a total snow job from top to bottom. And I'll never turn on NPR again or click on their article. That's it. And never again will I have anything to do with that corrupt organization. And I think that a lot of people are feeling that way this week after the Biden-Trump debate of late June last week.
Well, I certainly fancied myself an NPR listener until Trump was elected.
Yeah, I used to donate money to them. I loved their culture. I would hit up Car Talk and This American Life nonstop on the podcast circuit.
The real death knell is when they took the comments off their articles because they could.
Just getting inflamed.
You can't put through that kind of propaganda and allow comments now.
You can't be a stenographer for the intelligence services and expect people not to notice on the internet. So it's very interesting to me to watch the internet destroy the control and authority that power has. It must have been exactly what it was like when the printing press came out in the in the early 15th century, in the 1400s. And the Vatican lost all control. They couldn't possibly ban or burn all the pamphlets. The pamphlets were flying off the printing presses far faster than the Pope could get his hands on them, and they just completely lost control. Whereas once they had the Bible on lockdown, it couldn't be translated out of Latin. You couldn't have the Bible in the Vulgate. And they had the narrative on lockdown, and they had all the wealth until the printing press came and blew up their spot. And the internet's doing the exact same thing to the masters of empire who rule over us, just as the printing press brought down the power of the Vatican in the late Middle Ages. And you might even say that the advent of the bound book as a piece of technology brought down the corrupt Caesars, or at least it had the Caesars bending the knee and accepting baptism into this new faith of Christ. So always interesting to notice how when new pieces of information technology blow up the regime that was counting on us not having that technology up until that point.
Well, the people in charge, I don't even know if it's like 100% malicious, but just if you're the one in power, I mean, you're just going to set up a paradigm that suits your narrative, right? That's just the nature of the beast. And so just inevitably technology is going to come along and blow it up.
Yeah. Yeah, the Bible had all kinds of things, all kinds of proscriptions against wealth and lending of money. Will and Ariel Durant, the famed historians, call it the communism of the apostles, and their passage says something like the English, the Vulgate translations of the Bible revealed the compromises the Vatican had made with human nature. And it also revealed the communism of the apostles as found in the New Testament. And as a direct result of that, like a guy named John Wycliffe tried to start a communist revolution in England in the 1400s, literally a propertyless society. This was his idea. Now, he managed to not get burnt at the stake. Now, Wycliffe was another guy like Julian Assange. He managed to escape the clutches of the Vatican. The Vatican declared him a heretic and excommunicated him in 1411. But Wycliffe had the good sense to die about a decade beforehand, so they couldn't get at him. All they could do was excommunicate him and ban his works, But usually the enemies of the Vatican end up immolated on a pyre, much like Michael Hastings. A good example is Jan Hus, who was inspired by John Wycliffe. He was the Czech guy who he did the same. He translated the Bible into the Czech language, and the Vatican summoned him to a conference in Germany. Under a flag of truce, and when he arrived, they just burnt him at the stake anyway, causing an insane riot in the first defenestration of Prague, back home in Czechia. So, interesting stuff to see all of this happening with so many nearly perfect historical parallels. It's really eerie and weird.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily malicious that with the people in power set up a narrative that suits them. But I mean, I think in this case, it definitely is malicious, or they are trying to sap the energy of the youth to keep themselves going. And it's like the adrenochrome that we've talked about.
Yeah,
and
yeah, there's a natural order to things where you sacrifice for the children, and then those children grow up, have children of their own, and sacrifice for those children. But there's something about the way that finance or capitalism works, where you become this like evil person who's sucking the lifeblood of the young. Because the longer you have capital, it's like gravity. Like dollars attract dollars in the same way that mass attracts mass, right? You get a return on there's supposed to be a certain nominal return on investment that is the zero risk return on investment that is the treasury bonds, and that's supposed to set the benchmark for all of the interest rates and reflect risk. Just like atoms attract atoms, dollars attract dollars. So like the older you get, the more money you're entitled to, and then the more money you're entitled to, the more money you're entitled to, and you get this positive feedback loop. The very same one that builds the stellar nuclear reactors that we call stars, builds these huge wealth concentrations that then beget even more wealth concentrations, and it's just so you end up in this place where you're, in order to keep your hoard growing, as you get older and older and your hoard gets bigger and bigger, you got to help yourself to the hordes of people who are young, people who are trying to have families and grow. So you end up with a self-terminating. This is why the Bible warns against finance. It's got nonstop rule. It straight up bans the lending of money as a sin. This is why it's a abomination. It's the exact opposite of the natural order of things.
Well, it was just viscerally revolting in practice. But if you're some bright-eyed young, college student, maybe just graduated, and Joe Biden is trying to like harvest you like an ear of corn or something, It's not good.
Yeah, it's an insane feeling being harvested like an ear of corn. That's exactly how I felt for 10 years.
Well, you're getting taken up into a giant combine and spun around and processed until, and reduced into industrial goop used to poison people with.
You have no say in your own fate and no ability to affect your own fate. You're just like, it's either that or just totally abandon the system and live outside of it, which I fantasized about on a near daily basis when I had to go to a job I didn't enjoy. And, it's like I didn't know how to didn't know how to quit that job. I got paid more than I could at any other place submitting applications, but it wasn't enough to pay down the debt and live with not multiple roommates. And so I just had no way out, and it was a hell of a feeling. And we've got the crusty old Joe Biden to thank for that.
Well, it's just he just has an old person look in his face like he doesn't know what's going on, and just to think that it's acceptable to put that on stage is just such a slap in the face. It just strains credulity. Yeah. Like it's just it's a huge insult. I mean, people really should be like upset and rioting in the streets after this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that. That's the real like. The fact, if that's really my final point on the Joe Biden debate. Like, if it was really if it was like they don't want people to, they want to assure people that like the idea that Donald could get elected is some existential crisis. Democracy will end if the Donald gets elected. But what they're really trying to stop you from doing is looking outside of their little propaganda sphere for information from other sources. Right? That's why they're saying that the Donald is evil. If they really believe that Donald was like an existential threat to the country, they wouldn't put up a tottering old codger who can barely speak. He can't really even speak at all. He can't get through a sentence. So let's just say a man who can barely walk and speak. They would have chosen someone else to run against the Donald, right? We know that they don't believe what they're telling us because they wouldn't put up someone. What they need is someone who is willing to carry out corporate interests even further as the corporations venture even further afield, and that slider between public good and corporate profits. Joe Biden is willing to make sure that was his line to donors in 2020. Nothing will fundamentally change. And no one else you get into office is willing to change nothing and just keep the status quo that is so miserable for so many. So donors are in a tight spot. They want Joe Biden back in the office so they can continue stealing everything that's not nailed down. And when I say stealing everything that's not nailed down, I mean like what happened in Russia in the 90s when like the gas companies were just sold off for fractions of what they were actually worth to all these mobsters, and they all have like gorgeous. I saw the yachts in Rhodes Harbor on the Greek island of Rhodes. All these black Russian yachts. They look like all like Bond villains, and it's the Russian mob. They're vacationing on Rhodes, and all these yachts come from these oil companies that are worth billions and that they got for millions. That's what's happening. The crown jewels of our country are being stolen. Meaning the infrastructure and the industry and all the things that make America powerful are all being stolen from us. And so Joe Biden's the man who can carry that out for them. That's why they want him elected. And so, but what are they going to tell the plebes who will have to continue living in a status quo that's intolerable? Well, tell them that the idea that the Donald could get elected is this big existential threat. Who believes it? We already had the Donald for 4 years. How can that possibly be convincing?
Yeah, well, it's a sleight of hand trick that distracts you from the fact that the status quo is the existential crisis. And rather than let, our young people live like, fulfilling and meaningful lives, they would like to just let the whole thing atrophy so that boomers can, maintain their status quo.
They'd rather Alaric the Visigoth sack Rome again than not make their quarterly profits. And so the donor class is walking on an edge that's getting narrower. And as the things get worse and people stop tuning in, like who's going to listen to NPR or NBC or any of these horrible news stations after the gaslighting continues with respect to Mr. Biden. It's like the idea they're not going to be able to get us all to pull the lever for someone who's not going to do anything for us. They're like out of tricks, and so it's really become fantastic entertainment. I mean, it is hilarious to see like the crazy headlines in the New York Times talking about how if you think Biden is old, you're an ageist. The man could not get a word out of his mouth on Thursday night. It's absolutely hilarious. Like it really has ascended to the realm of comedy now. I mean, I've had tears in my eyes laughing at several of the Breaking Points the Breaking Points broadcast this week. Highly recommend everyone check it out.
Well, the Trump-Hillary debates, we're like kind of like watching the Super Bowl, just like overwhelmingly engaging. I just could not believe what was happening next. But this is like engaging on a different level. It wasn't really like the particular. It wasn't Donald Trump saying well you should go to prison. It was just the insanity of the spectacle was just completely unparalleled. It was just unbelievable that they would try to like pass this off on us, and so truly shocking, I would say.
One last attachment. RFK is making the rounds trying to get that Democratic nomination now after the post debate on Thursday, which is exciting. Maybe he could actually there's no way, because his whole campaign is based on the COVID madness and bringing down the hammer on our supposed regulatory agencies.
Well, and he actually like talked about like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and what's going on in the Ukraine and whatnot when we saw him here in Portland. And those are they of course did not talk about BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, or the price of houses in this crazy debate.
Those are like the four things that they can't. They're like Joe Biden. The whole point of Joe Biden is that he won't talk about those things. That's why they wheeled that old codger out for our entertainment on Thursday night. Man, wild stuff, eh?
Yep. All right, what else have we got, Nate?
Okay, so I thought I would just relate a tale. I just got my hair cut. I got my ears lowered. My hair was getting pretty long. So I was at the old Mill Creek barbershop about an hour and a half ago, and the man in the chair was asking what I do, and eventually this podcast and system failure more broadly came up. And like there are a number of ways that you can attach. There's a number, like system failure is a constellation of ideas, and the constellation is a little bit complex. And so the big bugaboo for me is figuring out how to condense this design of stars, this design of ideas, this constellation of ideas into a linear fashion, right? So it's, you've got your engine and then a bunch of boxcars in your caboose. So I got to put them in linear order. And it's a tough one. And one of the big jumping off points is like student loan debt. You hear me blathering on about that all the time. It's how I got into this stuff. So you have to like guess what kind of person your audience is or what their proclivities are and try to map out an attack on the system failure constellation of ideas, or an angle of attack, or a vector of attack that makes sense. And I tried dimensionality. It was as I mentioned, student loans is one of them. The goddess Demeter is another one. My mind was blown going to Eleusis, just outside of Athens, and going to the old Telestron, the Temple of Demeter, and then going to Florence and seeing that the Medici had organized their entire hedge maze not just around two statues of Demeter, which they had dug up, and their agents had dug it up in Greece. But also about more broadly the alchemical journey itself, an idea we've talked about many times and I won't dig into here, but that was a real we didn't know to expect Demeter. It was just really odd to see her in both places. Or the moment when I found the pyramid with the capstone, with the bronze capstone that was right outside the window, where in 1619 enraged Czechs threw Catholic administrators out of a window. It started the 30 Years' War, which gave rise to the modern era.
That's the aforementioned defenestration of Prague, right?
Well, this was the biggest one in 1619. The one involving Jan Hus was a much more
a different defenestration.
Yeah, the Czechs have a great tradition. When people come to their city and try to rule them, they chuck them out the window. There's been many defenestrations of Prague. The most recent involved a communist, a Soviet. One of the Soviet politicians or whoever, so there was a defenestration, like in the 50s. But there was one. The big ones are like 1411 when the early 1400s when Jan Hus went to the Vatican to assert his right to translate the Bible into English, and they just burned him. And his supporters were like, "You got to be kidding me!" And they stormed the new town hall and they chucked a whole bunch of Catholic administrators out to their death. I think 9 people fell to their death out the window. In the most famous defenestration of Prague, there was two Catholic administrators, and then like a secretary somehow got thrown out also. There was like a broken leg. They landed in a pile of feces, which is very funny from a propaganda standpoint, because Catholic propaganda suggested the feces was there by the grace of God to save the Catholics, and Protestant propaganda suggested that feces is the only just treatment for Catholics. So there was like a propaganda war, and before you knew it, it was like the World Wars. All of Europe went to war. Like Sweden went to war. It's like crazy. All the European countries, and it was this brutal, bitter conflict. And when it was over, everyone agreed, okay, Pope, we're going to set up international borders, and you're not going to cross those international borders anymore, because people who want to be Protestant have got to be allowed to be Protestant. And that was more or less how the modern, it was mostly like city-states before that, but today we have nation-states, right? Every inch of land that's not Antarctica is whacked up. Some country owns it. That's how we just think of our modern country. But so Demeter is another one, or so the fact that the unseeing eye. You can also find pictures of the same thing that's on the back of the $1 bill. Right, there's a big sculpture of that outside this window in Prague, and then 2 obelisks too, all within like a 20-foot radius, right there. Mind blowing, right? So that's one vector, Demeter, or the all-seeing eye. Dimensionality is another one. Platonism / dimensionality, something I've spit into this microphone many times on the pod and will do many more times. And so dimensionality is where I landed on with my venerable haircutter. And I was trying to explain to the guy that temporal dimensions and spatial dimensions are interchangeable, but I just couldn't get him to understand that.
So
it was a total failure.
You were trying to get him to explain how like time is just another axis like the z-axis, but we just don't have a good way to articulate it due to our being fourth dimensional beings, I guess.
Precisement. Right. I use the line that it's 150 miles to Boston and it's 2 hours to Boston. These are two ways of relaying the exact same piece information, right? You can measure the distance with a stopwatch, you can measure the distance with a ruler. It's the same. You're measuring the same physical thing. But I just could not get him to understand that, no matter how I tried. So it was like frustrating. And so I have another angle of attack I've been formulating lately. I'll try out on you, Brian. Tell me what you think. Like, I'm always on here talking about Marxist prophecies, but I think that you can, like, if you suspect someone is a business owner, like this gentleman was the owner of the barbershop. If you suspect someone is a pro-capitalist and a business owner, then maybe the way to attack it would be to suggest to them that, I don't think anyone can argue that everyone knows that technology will eventually consume capitalism. Right? Once we have robots that do the work and there's no need for anyone to go to work, then we can't have people owning the means of production that will, because there'll be no one to buy their products if no one else. You can just see how, but you don't even have to go into, you can just talk about the foundation thinkers of capitalism itself. This would be the John Stuart Mills and the David Ricardos, and of course the immortal Adam Smith. These guys were obsessed with a little thing called earned versus unearned income. And the reason they were obsessed with earned versus unearned income is because they were embroiled in a revolt against the aristocracy, the ruling class, the crowned heads of Christendom who owned all the land in Europe, because their ancestor had clubbed people to death, and their ancestor was the warlord who was able to like beat everyone, put a sword through everyone else's face and win the land for themselves. And then when capitalists were building factories in like Manchester, the UK, Manchester, England, they found that there was a problem because the landlords could just take whatever wages the factory owners paid to their workers. Right? There was this conflict between landlords and industrial capitalists. And so one way of attacking this for a business owner, like the man who cut my hair today, might be to say to him, like, we have to get back to grassroots capitalism. We have a corrupt system here. The thing that's happening to us is the exact thing that like John Stuart Mill and David Ricardo and Adam Smith warned endlessly about. They said you have to look out for rent seekers. And we talked about rent seeking at the top of the pod, and I'm paying it off now. Like, rent seekers they don't want to actually provide a good or service that you would pay for. They're just using leverage to get you to pay for it. And that ties back to the application fee that I had to pay. It's like, I'm not getting a good or service. It's just they can withhold access to something that I have to have. And so they can charge fees on it. Right? Rent seeking. And the three big types of rent seeking are, of course, the rental of money, like finance, how much it costs to rent money. It's landlording. So land, like where people actually have to live. And then monopolies too. When there's no competition, you can just charge whatever price you want for your service, and people have to pay you. People are just forced to pay you. And that is the reason that no one wants to work anymore, right? Because the finance capitalists, it's not the landed aristocracy that's doing it to us this time. It's the finance capitalists. These guys have jacked up the prices on housing such that small business owners, like the kindly gentleman who gave me a haircut today, have to. When landlords jack up rent, the business owners ultimately are the ones who have to pay that. Right? Their employees are not going to come work for you if they don't have a home, right, to live in, and they're not going to be very enthusiastic about their job if they can only afford a home to rent and nothing else. They can't save. They have no hope of owning a house in the future. And that what we have to do is get back to some hard, like this skirts the whole scary question of Marx and communism for the older crowd, right? Like I will admit that referring to myself as a communist in the sense that I think that means of production should be democratically controlled, using the word communist it gets a beautiful reaction from old people, but it doesn't win them over to your side. It gets a hilarious reaction, but it's not going to make them sympathetic. So what do you think, Brian? Do you think that we could like people who tend to be pro-capitalist or haven't thought too much about the issue, but have noticed that no one wants to work anymore, this explanation, I think, should be satisfying to them. And, you can just... I wished I had started with that thread and not the dimensionality one. I just thought I would be able to blow his mind with the idea that I used the symphony, right? Listening to the symphony, hearing each note in sequential order versus seeing the entire symphony laid out on a page at once. And I couldn't get him to see it. So I don't know. It's harder than I thought a harder idea than I thought to grok.
I guess I have some questions. When you talk about 2 hours to Boston versus 150 miles.
Yeah.
So, what broader point about communism or whatever were you trying to get him to understand in particular?
That Platonism, every time empires die, Platonism comes round. Right? Platonism in the form of Christianity and the fall of Rome. Platonism in the form of magic during the collapse of medieval society and then the subsequent Renaissance and Reformation. And now Platonism, as we've beaten to death on this pod many times and will continue to beat to death, Platonism is now back in the form of the double slit experiment and in the form of the placebo effect. Right?
So basically, in times of revolution, ideas come down from on high is sort of the short version. Yes, that's a perfect encapsulation. I would just illustrate the picture differently. It's a distinction, that's not that important, but I feel like the Platonism comes from the freakish edge of society. Like all ideas come from the fringe, right? This is why peer review is a catastrophe because all the new ideas never come from the establishment. They always come from the fringe. And if you have peer review, you're locking out fringe ideas and you can never move your ideology forward. And that science is stuck in that spin cycle, that whirlpool, and has been low these past 50 years. I guess I don't know where else they would come from, and they're not going to come from the corrupt establishment, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, in the case of Christianity, they maybe came from one particularly awoken sage, Yeshua ben Yosef, Jesus Christ. I always remember T-Mac's description of the 14th century under the Holy Roman Empire. They had the Holy Roman Empire on lock. Everyone believed what the emperor and the pope told them. No one questioned it. But then in the 1400s or the 15th century, after the Black Death, all hell broke loose. People started believing in horoscopes and superstitions and alchemy. Like magic just started bubbling up. And the reason is because the Black Death exposed the fact that the authorities had no idea what they were talking about, and that opened the door for new and crazy ideas. And some of the crazy ideas turned out to be good ones. And that's exactly the period in history we're living through right now, with the empire losing control of the narrative and all kinds of crazy ideas rushing in to replace them. Some of those ideas are going to be the ideas of the future, just as it was in the Renaissance, just as it was post-Roman Empire with Christianity. So this was the point I wanted to articulate with dimensionality. I couldn't get there.
And so when you were trying to explain about the miles versus time, did you start by trying to explain about communism?
No, I did not go to communism at all. I only talked, but I did talk about Platonism. The man clearly had no idea about Plato. Understandable. It's not really taught in the schools. But he could not seem to figure out what I was talking about.
Well, I think I don't really think earned versus unearned income is going to be a great way to come at this barber shop owner either.
Why not? He's a man who runs a business.
Well, he probably has a bunch of barbers working for him that pay rent, and he's engaged in some kind of rent-seeking behavior. And therefore, it's not in his interest to pursue that line of inquiry. But I do think the bit where you have to pay employees a certain amount because they can't afford their housing is, you could talk about like all the coffee shops on Congress Street in Portland that they closed. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good inroad. Broadly speaking, I think what we need to do is try to reach young people, and I think that young people are effed. I mean, I thought that we were effed.
Yeah,
but I mean,
Zoomers are screwed. Can
you just imagine if they took 2 or 3 years of your high school years away to a COVID lockdown?
Yeah, that would be crazy.
And now you don't even your classes are a joke and stuff, and then. I mean, they've just completely undermined the integrity of the whole education system.
Oh, man.
I mean, it's a huge FU. And then, I mean, you're going to be I don't know when the iPads came out and when the kids who's been on iPads since the age of 1.5 are going to, come to fruition here. But man, I mean, those kids are effed. And, what do we have to do to like get kids like off of like social media, man, and like how do you cultivate like independent thinking? I mean, I don't know, probably do the captain solution of spiking the water supply with LSD. Well,
could be the solution. That really could be it.
I don't know. Just overall, though, like the level of desperation. It just, I think, like the really like worst possible feeling, right, is like hopelessness. Yeah. Which when I have to see all these homeless people out, outside, that there's a lot of it. And so I don't know, like, so your barbershop friend is there's probably like no breaking through that wall if he's comfortable with the life he's got, or maybe you should smoke a joint with a dude before going on a lengthy diatribe about Plato. But ultimately, I think the big question we got to ask ourselves is how are we going to reach young people? And so I don't know, maybe we need to like make TikToks or something, or make Plato seem cool.
Yeah. Well, okay. Couple items there. One, you talked about the damage to the children, and high school must be rough, but imagine if you were like missed first and second grade, like crucial, and you couldn't see anyone's face. You didn't learn how to, like, I mean, the younger, I mean, even younger than high school is going to be devastating, but the younger ones even more devastating. And then to your earlier point, just about the man, I guarantee you that no capitalist sees themselves as exploiting their workers or fencing their workers' labor or scalping their workers' labor. Right? I mean, if there are economically educated, that is a specifically Marxist view of what's going on at the workplace. I don't think this man is going to think that way. I don't think any capitalist, especially these small businesses, I don't think they think that way. I'm offering you a job. I'm doing you a huge favor.
Well, the hook is that how much they have to pay their employees because how much rent costs.
Yeah.
But I mean, broadly speaking, I think you're fighting a pretty tough battle there, and so it's the proletariat we need to speak to, and not the property owners.
Well, I'll keep working on my pitch. It is such a huge raft of ideas. System failure is that it is really tough to figure out how to line up these train cars and customize it for each person you're talking to.
Well, I guess you'd have to ask this guy like what he thinks is wrong, if anything, with society, and I guess you'd need to like tailor something to that particular viewpoint. I mean, did this guy did he commiserate with you about the ills of modern life or anything like that?
He wanted to know about the afterlife and spirituality, because I explained to him with like a one sentence, the historical relationship between drugs, finance, and magic. Not drugs. I didn't use drugs. I used history, finance, religion, and magic. And he really wanted to know about the afterlife, and he really wanted to know. So that's why I thought, I'll get this guy with Platonism, with the idea that there's the realm where you decide to make a fist, and then there's the weird place where your fist actually balls up. I used that line, and I just couldn't. I don't know.
I think you could talk about the importance of like sacrificing for the children and how that brings us meaning. And see, that's not like a specific discussion of the afterlife, but I think if you want to have a good afterlife, it's probably important to be living that way instead of trying to parasitize. I imagine there's going to be some crazy karmic debt to be paid by people like Bill Gates and Joe Biden and these other a-holes in charge. And so I don't look forward to whatever reality is going to beset them after they die. Although I mean, I don't know. They don't seem worried about it. I don't know. You gotta make a life that you're at peace with yourself, and some people are just like sociopaths, and so I guess sociopathic people are happy with themselves somehow, or I don't know. I don't think they feel. I think there's just no God in them, unfortunately.
They don't have a theory of mind for the person they're talking to, or they don't have any. They don't imagine what it would be like to be on the receiving ends of their actions. This is what I understand about psychopathy and sociopathy. And it's about 3% of us. And I feel like when you start talking about Gates and Biden and Hillary and even all this whole crew of people, these are all sociopaths. They've got to be. 3% is a huge amount. I think that the incidence of homosexuality, that's a tough one. But depending on the poll, you get like 3, 4, 5%, something like that. So it's like similar to the number of folks who chance to be gay. like a similar proportion, and it seems like there's a lot of gay people. There's plenty of 3% is a lot. Is what I'm saying. Like the idea that there's also that many sociopaths is just like, why? I mean, it's scary. You wouldn't know who these people are. Except for they're on the debate stage, or they're running multi-billion dollar companies. So, yeah, scary stuff, man. I think that's exactly so about the sociopaths.
The hard part is just if you're like suffering at the hand of sociopaths and just don't feel like you have any hope. That's just like a really rough situation, because you feel like, because you're not a sociopath, life should reward you in some ways. And I think that it probably will, but it's like a lot of hard work because a lot of obstacles have been set up. But they just try to make like your teens, they just try to make their life like as hard as possible. And they make it hard to be like a self-actualized adult. And I mean, just like the COVID is just like the clearest microcosm of this. Like, let's just fuck up all the children shit and see how that treats them. That'll be good for the economy. That'll grow the GDP, huh?
They didn't even care. It was just how can we get this emergency use authorization so we can print our own money. I mean, and whatever that costs, people, we don't care. We just got to keep it rolling.
That's like a real like a ritual to Satan right there is what it is.
Well, I suppose by way of a final thought here, I will just say that the big lesson for me of traveling has been this: that it may be the case that the incidence of psychopathy and sociopathy hover around 3%, a disturbingly high figure. But the other 97% of us are like all good people. The thing about traveling is that you just learn that everyone is like good in like the same way. Even the most notable is the traveling to Serbia, a country that unfortunately our own ridiculous empires drop bombs on in living memory. And you go there like, yeah, I do apologize for the bombings, old chaps. That was maybe not the wisest. But they don't hold it against you. They understand that like we have a corrupt regime in Belgrade. You have a corrupt regime in Washington. They were just excited to meet an American, and they opened their homes and had these impeccable rituals of hospitality that they were just they would like give you you got the impression they would just give you anything, if you asked for it. They were just so hospitable that it just gives you great faith in humanity when you go out and see that everyone wants to have fun with their friends and their family and have kids and make a little money. Most people don't succumb to the dreaded pleonexia, Plato's description of wealth addiction that brings down societies, right? That's the whole point of Plato's Republic. How do we deal with pleonexia, the addiction to wealth, the horrible addiction? Like if you're addicted to Cheetos, you can get full, but if you're addicted to wealth, no amount of consumption can possibly sate you. Just the more you consume, the hungrier you get. And it's a scary thing. And Plato thought, well, you have to have, what did he call it? The wise ruler. What was the word for that, Brian, in the Republic? Enlightened ruler? What was it? Philosopher king. That's it. Yeah, the philosopher king. He was, demurred on democracy, but I think democracy really harnesses that 97% of us who just want good things for our neighbors and ourselves and our families and our friends, and that's it. And so I think that all we have to do is, once it's really a war of ideas. Once people can see what's happening, we're throwing our shoulder to the wheel here on system failure, pushing this broken Winnebago up a hill. The more you can wake people up and stop them from tuning into, the communiques from the empire on their Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or NBC, whatever horrible, Washington Post, New York Times. And the sooner we can get them watching Crystal and Saga or getting their news from, it doesn't even matter how crazy, as long as your news isn't coming from the empire, we're in good. We'll be in great shape. And so I think that we're watching the last death throes of a struggling regime. Like I said, they've painted themselves into a corner. The knife edge they're walking gets narrower and narrower by the day. And I think that the tipping point is coming soon. It feels like an impending sense of climax to me. Or 2024 feels climactic. And man, I can't believe it's only June and we already got that hilarious debate with the barely sentient Joe Biden.
All right, well, I think just on your 97% point, I mean, I think, probably 97% of people are good, although just like a lot of people, I think, have just been like stupefied by the circumstances around them and aren't really in a position to like I mean, I just think of like people in, I don't know, mostly poor people, so maybe in trailer parks or maybe like in the ghetto or whatever, and they're just like not eating good food, and just living a life of poverty and whatnot. And I think it's just hard to reach much in the way of self-actualization. And so, I mean, like in Serbia, I mean, I think of people like our friend Vlad who are tall and muscular and hardy and whatnot. They probably don't eat like crappy food over there. And
No, their food is actually nutritious.
Yeah,
it tastes completely different.
and get like, reasonable amounts of exercise. And so, I mean, I think we gotta implore young folks to shut the laptop, eat like real food. Yeah, like man, like Domino's is just absolute poison, man. God damn, like Domino's is like that. There's nothing worse than having a belly full of Domino's, except maybe like a belly full of Taco Bell. I don't know what is worse.
This is lack of information too, though, right? I mean, if people just don't realize that the food is poisoned, right? They just need a wake up call, an alarm clock. They need a System Failure podcast to help them understand how their food is poisoning them.
Yeah, and I guess just another thing I want to say is like the sun is good for you. The sun is not bad for you. The sun is good for you, and you probably want to get as much sun as you can. Although if you feel like you're burning, you should go inside or get some shade. But you gotta build your skin up so that you can be in the sun for a long period of time. But
you don't want like a sunburn. But I do agree with Touchdown Tommy, or maybe what was the name of the guy who was Touchdown Tommy's Tom Brady's health guru,
Alex Guerrero.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. He suggests that the more hydrated you are, the harder it is to get burnt. So maybe there's some truth to that.
Be surprised.
Yeah, it does make sense. I do think about the times I got sunburn. I also got badly dehydrated.
Well, one thing I've also heard is that if you're out in the sun, like if you go into the shade periodically, you don't burn. But usually, you get a terrible sunburn because you're just out on the beach in direct exposure for hours and hours and hours. If you just give your skin a break, you can endure a lot more sun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess those are some pointers. Don't go into terrible student loan debt if you can avoid it. But probably closing the goddamn laptop and staying off of the Instagram and TikTok is probably pretty darn important. Unfortunately, we're not on the Instagram or TikTok, which could be bad for our youth demographic. So we'll have to figure something out there.
If you can think of video content, so you mentioned this before, and so most days I will pimp the latest System Failure podcast and the most recent System Failure essay across Substack and Twitter, but all I have is pictures and descriptions with like words. So it would be good to have some. My pictures are usually graphics or something like that. It would be good to have pictures. Good to have like us talking. So yeah, I do think we need to start making video content, but man, it's all I can do to write an essay and get a podcast out and work 40 hours, in a single week. So I have to find out how to be more efficient, I guess. But definitely, I would love to make some video content, Brian. If we could think of a way to churn that out on a weekly basis, well, that would be outstanding.
I agree.
Put your mind on it. Put your grind on it. We'll figure it out.
All right.
Well, what do you think, Brian? This is usually the time of the podcast where I beg our listeners to send in their thoughts to nop@substack.com. You can email us there, and if you do, we'll read it on the air, even if it's some minor thing with the way that I deliver my words or touch my microphone. We'll bring it up on the air if we get it. And to sign up for the weekly essays, the most recent being on the Treaty of Westphalia that ended the 30 Years' War. The Germans say Westphalen. You can check that guy out at not.substack.com.
All right, we'll see you, folks.
Bye-bye.